Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. Today I'm reviewing Resident Evil Final Chapter. This was written and directed by Paul W.S. Anderson and starred Milla Jovovich and Ali Larter. Those who haven't seen it, the film picks up after Resident Evil Retribution. Alice, played by Milla Jovovich, is the only survivor of what was meant to be humanity's final stand against the undead. Now she must return to where the nightmare began, the Hive in Raccoon City, where the Umbrella Corporation is gathering its forces for a final strike against the only remaining survivors of the apocalypse. So I'm a little late to the party with this film. I've only heard really bad things about it. I've put off watching it for as long as I could, but ultimately I got an opportunity to get a copy of it for really cheap. So I thought I'd give it a go. This actually lives up to how bad it truly is. This film is terrible in many ways. The only really great thing about it, or the only thing that's sort of bearable in the film, is Milla Jovovich and her performance. I think Alice is an interesting character, and I think the way Milla plays her is great, and you find her engaging and you want to be part of her world. You want to be part of what she has to do ultimately and see her kick some ass. And that's what this film sort of does. The biggest problems with it is, one, they try and rewrite the story once again. They try and give you an original concept of what transpired before all of this T-virus and everything that happened in the Resident Evil world. And it sort of contradicts a lot of things that they've come up with previous, and it sort of cements the idea that, okay, there's going to be spoilers here, cements the idea that Alice is actually a clone. Every Alice incarnation we've seen is a clone, and there's this old version of her in a wheelchair who is part of the board, part of the Umbrella Corporation. And they've based the look of Alice on her, and also the little girl, the Red Queen, turns out to be Alice as well as a young girl. They sort of rewrite things, which I don't think is brilliant. They bring back characters that were meant to be dead, such as the villain, which I thought was really stupid. There's a line in it where she says, "I thought I killed you." And he said, "No, not me." And she's like, "Oh, so I killed a clone." And it's like, so we're going to do with clones now? I thought that was just dumb. Like, they keep bringing back things that are finished with and are done, and I thought that was kind of stupid. I kind of didn't mind the fact they went back to the Hive, but it was just reliving the same thing we'd seen in the previous incarnations and the previous films of this story, and I just didn't care too much for it. The other big problem with this film is the editing. It is horrific. There are 1 second cuts and you don't really know what's going on. You can't see what's happening. This is not more evident than the beginning of the film, when she sort of comes up out of the underground and ultimately has to battle this giant winged, deformed creature with a scorpion tail that doesn't make any sense how it was formed, and it's kind of stupid, and she has to battle this, but it's done in all these sharp cuts and twists and turns, and there's this scene where she's just walking along and it's got so many cuts in it, you confuse what's actually happening. And that happens throughout the film. There's fight sequences in it that you can't see a damn thing because of the damn editing. It's just really dumbly edited together, and that's not its only problem. It's just a stupid story. It's just something that feels dated and used and a waste of time. This is a franchise that's never really captivated, never really interested me that much. I didn't really care much for the first one. I thought it was, besides Milla Jovovich, I just didn't care for it. The second one is just a blatant rip-off of a video game, but also kind of a solid action film, and it's okay. The third one I really liked, and I think that all comes down to the fact that Paul W.S. Anderson didn't direct it. It was directed by an Australian filmmaker who knew how to handle action and horror really well. That's my favourite of the whole series. That's my favourite, not only because it wasn't directed by Anderson, but also the fact that it's sort of this nomadic Mad Max-esque storyline. And also there's a lot of characters that we meet, and these characters had a lot of depth, and there's a lot to them that you sort of care for them when bad things start to happen to them. And in it you kind of see how Alice is controlled, but she also takes control as well. And I thought this was a great this is one of the best executed of the series. And Afterlife and the variety of other films that came after it, Retribution felt like a heavy metal video clip, the whole movie. It was just all dumb. The whole thing's been dumb from the beginning. This is a franchise that, one, should be taken away from Paul W.S. Anderson and put into someone else's hands who knows how to handle this material. Stop doing movies and maybe do a TV series. I know there's all this crazy thing happening in the world now and not many things are being made, but after it all happens, I think you could take this series and do something really interesting with it. And you could really put it on TV and have a few seasons of it. It could be sort of like Walking Dead, but very different and vastly different from that in its execution. And I just think you could do a lot with this particular material. The biggest problem with the series, that's always been the problem, is they've just taken the video game storylines or video game things and just made a movie of it. They've never allowed it to evolve or change or become its own thing. They just keep basing it on the video game. What makes a good film based on video games? Ultimately making it its own thing and removing it from the video game thing and not copying storylines from it or not copying the way it looks. Like in this franchise, the second film is straight ripped from the video game. That's all it is. And I just think you're not doing anything interesting. And the same thing they did with the recent Tomb Raider. They just took it from the game. To make these successful, you need to do something different with them. Otherwise, they just become boring and cliched and uninteresting in many ways. And this film's like that. It's very boring in parts because you can't see what's going on. You're confused about things. People get killed, but you don't really know why or who is dying. And the storyline gets convoluted and silly, and the action sequences get bigger, but they're kind of dumb, and they introduce things that don't make sense. I thought it was really poorly executed. And I think for me, I'm just over them. Over the Resident Evil storylines and movies and games. I just want something different from it, I guess. Once again, we're introduced to a band of survivors that we know nothing about and we don't care for. So when they start dying, we don't give a shit. And that's just what the film feels like. It's really disappointing in many ways. The ending's a bit cliched. A lot of the film is clearly ripping off Blade Trinity in so many ways. Like in that film, you've got Blade and there's this antidote thing that could get rid of all the vampires, and he ultimately, by executing it, he could die himself. And they copy that straight here. That he comes up with an antidote to stop the zombies and to bring everything back to normal, and because she's part of the virus, it might kill her. And it just feels like they just saw that movie, ripped stuff straight from it and put it into this, and it was disappointing. I didn't have high hopes going into this film, and I was very disappointed anyway with the whole thing. I thought it was a waste of film and a waste of an opportunity to do something kind of interesting. And I feel sorry for Milla Jovovich because I think she's kind of solid in these sort of actiony roles. And she can act. I've seen her be able to do that. But she's just presented with these terrible films that she has to keep being part of. And that all comes down to her husband, Paul W.S. Anderson. And there must be a point where he says to her, "Sweetheart, I've written another Resident Evil script." And she's like, "Oh shit, I thought you were done with that." "No, not yet." And she's like, "Oh fuck." So it just feels like he keeps writing them, she has to keep being in them, but she doesn't really care too much. I would say if you like the Resident Evil movies, stick with the earlier ones. They're much better. Even though I didn't like them, they're a lot better than this. The worst one of the previous films is probably 10 times better than this film. But if you want to conclude the series, give it a go. But I don't recommend watching it if you're not really interested in the series or want to see how it pans out, because it's just not worth your time. Final thoughts. This is one of the worst films I've seen in a long time. There's a whole slew of these. I think it has many reasons why it's bad. A poor story, terrible editing. It's created by someone who's just doing video games rather than making it its own. And it goes to show how much of a sad and dead franchise this film is really part of. And it's sad to say that, but I think they should finish it here. Either do a reboot or do a TV series or do something different, because it's not worth doing any more films in my opinion. I'm going to give Resident Evil Final Chapter half a star. And that is for Milla Jovovich. This is disappointing, boring, poorly executed, and just a waste of an hour and a half in my opinion. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.